Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jimbo and I'll be your human narrator in today's video, just like I was in the past 200 or so videos. Click on the like button to show your support for real humans. It's crazy it's come down to this. These are interesting times for sure. Anyway, last week we got the 1.6 liter normally aspirated Volkswagen diesel engine up and running in this 1989 Chevy S10 pickup. As a matter of fact, we even took the truck out for a quick spin around the neighborhood. Now this truck is registered and insured, but it ain't exactly street legal yet. I reckon it still needs a bunch of thingies in order to pass any kind of roadside inspection. You see, here in Kansas, we don't bow down to the government and have them dictate what's good or not. Nope, it's up to me to make sure the truck's safe to drive on public roads. And that part's gonna be easy, because this truck was more or less safe to drive before the engine transplant, despite it not being drivable, if that makes any sense. Anyway, today we're going to focus on a handful of minor issues in order to get this truck roadworthy. Now this actually works out great, because it's been cold, damp, and rainy this week, and it's not the kind of weather I want to drive in right now, so let's take the time to get this thing sorted out so it's somewhat safe to drive. This truck originally came with a simple instrument cluster. Basically, it had a speedometer and a fuel gauge. Everything else had a warning light to alert the driver of any possible upcoming disaster. Simple is good, and I like simple. Well, in other news, I was able to find a dashboard for this truck that wasn't completely destroyed by the sun. You know, these dashes are hard to find, so I didn't hesitate to buy it. And as a bonus, this dash came with a very nice wiring harness. So obviously I used the harness instead of the harness that originally came with the truck. And that's a problem. You see, this connector, which is part of the harness, is made for the optional gauge package that has the oil pressure gauge, the volt gauge, and a temperature gauge. Now, on my other Chevy S10, I actually have this optional gauge package, and I'm not a big fan of it. Perhaps it's just my eyesight, but I find the gauges hard to read, so I went ahead and installed some extra gauges that are more to my liking. Anyway, this connector is specifically wired for the optional gauge package, and the original simple instrument cluster will not work. The pinout of the connector is completely different, and I have no desire to rearrange the pins on this connector. So I'm going to end up having to get the cluster with all the gauges in it. And like I said, I'm not a really big fan of those. So I'm going to install some extra gauges over here because it makes me happy to see the actual numbers instead of whatever is displayed on the fancy upgraded gauge package. So here we go. I have everything to build the gauge panel. Now for the gauges, I'll be using these El Cheapo digital gauges. And the cool thing about these are, they're cheap and they also have programmable alarms. This voltage gauge can be programmed to sound an alarm if the voltage gets too low, and despite the fact that I'm actually installing the gauge, I never really have to look at it unless the alarm goes off. The water temperature gauge is the same way. It's got a programmable alarm and you get the idea. Now I could install an oil pressure gauge, but instead of doing that, I'm going to use this alarm thingy that'll connect to the factory oil pressure switch on the diesel engine. Now, unfortunately, the logic to trigger this gizmo is backwards, so I'm going to end up using a relay to flip the logic around, and that way the alarm will go off if the oil pressure drops too low. Now this button is what I'm going to use to trigger the high current relay for the glow plugs. This guy is of decent quality and pretty much is all I really need. This, of course, is the part of the dashboard where we're going to be installing all this junk. It's obviously made to house the radio unit, but I'd rather listen to the diesel engine. Meh, they don't play Iron Maiden on the radio anymore, so in my opinion, radios are pretty much useless. This is a sheet of FR4 fiber that I use in a lot of my robotic projects. As a matter of fact, before I got the 3D printer, I made a lot of my parts from this stuff. You know, the only downside to this material is it'll dull your drill bits and cutting blades in a hurry, and I guess that's due to the fiberglass content. So here's the simple schematic that I'll be using to flip the logic signal from the oil pressure switch. Basically, I'll be using a mechanical relay to invert the signal, and that's because the oil pressure switch connects to ground whenever there is oil pressure, and that's sort of backwards of what I want. And let's get started. So I really could use an Arduino microcomputer in an application like this. I mean, it wouldn't really take much to feed all the signals into the micro, write a few lines of code to completely automate the glow plug switch, and of course I could use the Arduino to trigger the alarms based on the signals coming from the engine. Plus a whole lot more actually. As a matter of fact, every project should include an Arduino of some sort, that's my opinion. But for this truck, I'm happy with the El Cheapo gauges. In theory, once the diesel engine is running, this truck doesn't require any electricity to stay running, except for a small amount of juice to keep the fuel shutoff solenoid active. Unfortunately, that guy needs a bit of power and the engine's not equipped with a mechanical shutoff lever. You know, if it wasn't for the electric shutoff solenoid, this truck wouldn't need any electricity at all. And since it has a manual transmission, I reckon on a warm day I could probably get this engine to fire off with just a push start. This Volkswagen engine might be a bit harder to start than a Kubota diesel engine though. Alright, so this is the outline that'll establish the usable area that we have to install the gauges and the other thingies. I'm thinking something like this should work, and this will give me some extra space below the glow plug button for something else in the future. Let me do some measuring off camera to figure out the exact location for all this stuff, and I'll be right back. So according to my measuring equipment, this is where everything should go. Let's make it happen. Like I mentioned earlier, this FR4 sheet is tough on drill bits and cutting tools. Sure, I can blast right through this stuff no problem, but after a while, you're going to notice your drill bits will no longer work on metal. It's a curious problem. Now for these holes, I'm going to be using a step drill bit, but not my good ones. Instead, I'll be using these El Cheapo bits. Now, the jury's still out on these cheapo bits. You see, they actually cut better than my good bits. It's interesting how sometimes junk will actually work way better than the good stuff. You know, it's a strange world we live in these days. And there we go. This panel is basically done, but I need to hit it with the DA to knock down any ridges. I'm using 200 grit paper on this guy, and that'll get the surface ready for paint, but I ain't going to be painting this. Instead, I'll use vinyl wrap. And this is about as good as it gets. It's been both sanded and washed. And now I can make it look fancy by wrapping it with a lightweight carbon fiber sticker. This is how they build race cars. They build them out of fiberglass and then put carbon fiber stickers all over it. Most people don't know the difference. Of course you folks will know, and that'll be our little secret. I can trust you folks to keep this on the down low, right? Ta-da! Not too shabby. Or maybe it is. It's hard to say. Anyway, on the back side of this panel, it's completely wired. The wiring's okay, it's not my best work. I put some quick connectors in so I can make some changes in the future. You know, I always get questions on where I get these awesome quick connectors and wiring devices, so I put a link in the video description. I've been using these connectors for a few years now without any problems, although I definitely don't recommend using them in a harsh environment like under the hood. You know, for interior stuff and general purpose prototyping, these are wonderful. Fast forward a few minutes and the panel's installed. Now, when I turn the ignition switch on, I get the annoying alarm sound, and that's because there's no oil pressure right now. In order to turn off the oil pressure alarm, well, you have to press this glow plug button for 10 to 15 seconds to start the engine. Once the engine's running, there are no alarms, and that's the way it should be. But if something goes wrong with the oil pressure, the engine temperature, or the voltage, we'll have to deal with an alarm. Like I mentioned before, each gauge has its own alarm. Now, for the voltage, I didn't program the alarm yet, but in theory it should be going off. The reason the voltage is low right now is the alternator's not working yet because I need to put the gauge cluster in place to sort out a few things. It's a long story, but no worries, it's a simple fix. Let's deal with another problem. The intake manifold on this engine is wide open, and we need to do something about that. The plan is to install a temporary air filter while we sort the truck out. Eventually, we'll have to make a lot of changes when I install the turbo on this engine, but for now we need an air filter. So first thing we need to do is design something that'll hold the air filter in place. Now, another problem is we need to ventilate the crankcase into the manifold. Over here you can see the vent on the engine, and there's a nub on the manifold we could use to vent the crankcase. But it's sort of an awkward connection, so I'm going to plug up this nub and incorporate the crankcase ventilation into whatever we make to hold the air filter. So this is something I designed on Tinkercad. Now, Tinkercad is a totally free resource on the internet, and it's for people who don't know jack about real CAD software. It's perfect for me. Now, right here on the air filter gizmo, I included a way to send the crankcase vapors into the intake manifold. This hole is 12mm, and that works out to be the perfect size to thread it with a 3/8 NPT pipe tap. Fast forward a few hours and the 3D printer has a surprise for us. Let's check it out. So this guy is printed from ABS plastic, and the printer did a pretty good job. The best part is I didn't have to do anything other than drink coffee while the printer did all the work. Over here is the crankcase vent hole, and as you can see, I already threaded it with 3/8 NPT. Threading this stuff is actually really easy as long as you design the part with the right size holes. Anyway, this brass fitting will screw into the part, and that'll give us a way to connect the hoses. So I designed this part in such a way that the 3D printer could spit it out in a few hours. You know, I could have designed this thing to be more complicated by including something that would replace the brass part. However, doing something like that would add many more hours to the print time because the printer would have to add all kinds of temporary support elements to the print, and that takes a lot of extra time. The longer it takes to print something, the more possibilities you'll have of something going wrong. So I designed this part to print the most efficient way, and that means I have to add the brass part after the part is printed. Unfortunately, I didn't include enough material in this print to add metal inserts to these holes. Now, these holes should really have a metal sleeve inserted in them in order for the part to bolt to the manifold and allow the bolts to be tightened to the proper torque. No worries, a quick edit to the CAD design and I'll have the printer shoot out a revised part. It's just that simple. For now, I'm going to use this part to sort everything out. As you can see, I have the 3D printed part installed on the intake manifold, and the air filter fits pretty good. Of course, that's with the hood open. You know, it turns out that the filter comes in contact with the hood when the hood is closed. Apparently, the sound insulation thingy takes up more space than I anticipated. So, now I need to relocate the air filter. It was nice while it lasted. So off camera, I came up with this combination relocation plumbing and cold air intake system. At least that's what I'm calling it. Anyway, it looks a lot better than it should because it has to look nice for YouTube, but keep in mind, this guy is only temporary because when we do the turbo, this stuff will get replaced with a completely different induction system. But for now, it'll work just fine, and it may actually help tone down the engine noise a little bit. So off camera, I sorted out the wiring, which wasn't too difficult. Basically, I just connected everything and by some miracle it all works. We got parking lights, headlights, high beams, and turn signals. At this point, the front of the truck checks out, but unfortunately we got nothing connected on the backside, and to fix that, we're going to need to put the bed back on the truck. Fast forward a few minutes and I have the bed on the cherry picker. You know, using a cherry picker or engine hoist to install or remove the bed is a simple way to move this bulky item around with just one person. This bed has some rust on it, but it's a lot better shape than most of the junk that's for sale locally. The good news is, the rust is not in the typical places and it won't take much to repair it. Well, November is upon us already, and I'm afraid I may not get a chance to paint this before winter sets in. That sucks. Okay, well, it took a few minutes to bolt the bed onto the frame of the truck and plug in the wiring harness. So now we have tail lights and we have turn signals. Very nice. Unfortunately, we don't have brake lights, and after a few minutes of fooling around under the dashboard, I discovered the brake light switch is damaged and we're going to need a new one. The good news is I have one ordered and it's on its way. Oh, and we even have windshield wipers. Not too shabby. Yeah, I have a few minor things I need to do off camera, but basically the truck is roadworthy. Well, almost. If you watched the previous video, then you're aware the transmission has issues. Hopefully I can repair or replace the transmission sometime soon. But for now, it'll work and the truck is drivable. We just can't abuse the transmission as much as I'd like to. I was really looking forward to take this truck out for a drive this week, but keep in mind, it's better to fix what we can while in a warm, dry shop during this rainy weather than it is to be out on the road in a half-ass assembled vehicle with no headlights, taillights, or windshield wipers. I reckon one way or another, the truck is ready for its first real road test in the next video. If you're curious how this 1.6 liter Volkswagen diesel powered Chevy pickup will perform out on the open road, then consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate all the subscribers and all the patrons. Without you folks, well, projects like this just couldn't happen. Anyway, I guess that's all the time I have this week, and I'll see you next time. Until then.